on, guys? Welcome back to the next part of the Firebase Chat App in Swift series. Today, we're going to be taking a look at adding our final method of logging the user in, which is sign in with Google. So let's jump right into it. Let's get started by opening up our workspace here. And let me also open up our simulator. And I've got the docs pulled up here for Google sign in case I forget something. That said, I've done this a million times, so we'll see if I break anything along the way. So before we actually do the Google sign-in thing, one thing that I mentioned in the last video that we didn't actually do is if a user is signed in with Facebook and we come back to this screen, the button here says log out. So let me actually show you, so in case you forgot. So if we sign in here, and I just continue with my account, it signs us in properly, and if we go to profile, and we hit sign out, if I can click this, there we go, and we hit log out. So it successfully logs us out of the Firebase session. However, this button still says log out because we also need to log out the Facebook session. So if I reopen this, we are indeed logged out, but Facebook still thinks we're logged in. So head on over to your profile view controller, and to fix this, it's super simple. Simply import FB SDK login kit, and then go down to the function that we added that shows that action sheet for logging the user out. And right before this do catch statement, where we actually log out the Firebase session, we are going to log out Facebook. And we do this by calling Facebook SDK login kit. And I believe there is a login manager. Get an instance of this and call log out. So now if we hit Command R one more time to build and run, why does it always default to the simulator? This is super annoying. Close that simulator. Let's change it back to our iPhone 11 Pro Max. And give that a second because it's going to build it again for this device. And we should still be on login with logout here. Give it a second. It's wanting to be slow today. There it goes. So let's manually log this out and let's try this again. So we're going to hit this to continue with Facebook. We're already signed into our session. We're going to continue, and boom, it logs us in. We're going to go back to our profile over here, and we're going to tap log out. And not only should this log out our Firebase session, but it should also log out this Facebook session also. So hit this, and now we have this as expected, so it can sign in again. There's no longer a log out button here as intended. So cool. So that said, let's focus on Google sign-in. So the first thing you want to do is head on over to your Firebase console, make sure you're signed in, click on authentication. Let's go to these authentication methods tab. And we forgot to do this for the Facebook sign-in, but we are not going to forget to do it for Google sign-in. Open up the Google dropdown here and just turn this switch on, and you can leave all of this as is. I think it does need, however, a email address for compliance reasons. So if you hit that dropdown, you'll get the default one for this Google account. Go ahead and hit save. And we should be good to go. It should save without any errors, hopefully, which I think it just did. Yep, looks like we are in business. Cool. So the next thing we want to do is bring in another CocoaPod, which allows us to show the Google sign-in button. So go ahead and open up Terminal and cd into your project and open that pod file up with an open pod file. And I think I copied this beforehand. So let's make a comment for Google sign in, and the pod is Google sign in, pretty well named and indicative of what it is. Go ahead and close up text edit and run pod install. And I think this brings in more than just that sign in under the hood. I think there's a few dependencies that Google brings in. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. So it brings in a couple things, but it should install fairly quickly. Go ahead and close up terminal. Just do a Command B to make sure things are still building post installation of this CocoaPod. And Next, what we want to do is go to our Google Services file that we brought in when we first set up Firebase. And as you can see, there's a bunch of keys in here. And what we care about is, let's see, not this, not this, not this. The secret, GCM, I believe is reversed client ID is what we care about, if I'm not mistaken. So go ahead and copy the value here for that. Click on your project navigator, so your app name there. Click on this, and then under the info tab, I believe this tab, let me just see if I can remember where we add it. Under this info tab, we want to add a URL info tab, or URL schema. So let's see. It might actually be under this info tab. Let's open this up. Here we are. So we want to open this up, this URL types. And over here, we simply want to leave this as is. So Facebook already has one that it added automatically. We're going to hit this to add one more. And go ahead and paste that thing that you copied, the reverse client ID business from the Google Services plist file in here. Basically, what these SDKs do under the hood is they use these as a callback to your app. It's not really relevant to know what's going on behind the scenes, but in case you're interested of what this whole thing is, that's why Facebook already did it automatically for us right here. Not sure why Google doesn't automatically do it, but anyways, now that we have that there, we need to go to our app delegate. And again, to get this project search window, Command-Shift-O. And in here, we want to, of course, start by importing Google Sign-In, like so. This used to be called GID Sign-In, but it has since been renamed. So that's what that's called. In our application did finish launching, what we want to do in here is specify two things. And let's do this. We have to do this after Firebase configure is called. And we can do it after this as well. So we're going to say GID sign-in shared instance, and we're going to say the delegate is self. It'll give you an error because we haven't conformed yet, so just ignore it for a second. And then we also want to say shared instance, and I believe it's client ID is going to be Firebase app options.client ID. So the reason this is optional is in case it's not able to find that plist to grab your client ID, it will return nil and assign nil to this. But it'll be able to find this since our configuration is already working. We just saw that we have the plist right here. So once we have that in our app delegate, we're going to go ahead and conform to this delegate that we're assigning self to. And we are going to do it up here. And I believe it's a GID sign-in delegate. And there are required functions in here. So we're going to hit this and fix, and it'll automatically stub out that function. Such a pet peeve of mine that it puts it at the top. So let's move it to the bottom. So this function gets called when the user successfully signs in, and it passes in a user object here. And let's see, it has sign in, it has an error. So when we come in here, we want to first make sure there's no error. So we're going to say guard error equals nil, else we're going to return, and we should print that error out. Fail to sign in with Google. And let's put that error in here. And similar to Facebook, how we traded our access token for a Firebase credential. And this is complaining because we didn't unwrap the error. So let me do that. If let error equals error, we can do this. But anyways, similar to how we traded that access token from Facebook for a Firebase credential, we're going to do something very similar here. But before we can go ahead and do that, we of course need to add a Google sign-in button and do a little more setup in here. So I'm going to go back to the docs here, and let me make this dark mode, make it a little easier to read. Let's make sure we didn't forget anything. So let's see, there is So here's that delegate function I was talking about. And actually, now that we're in here, we might as well just copy this. And this is how we're going to trade the access token from Google for a Firebase credential. And we're going to review this code that we copy and paste. Anytime in this series I copy and paste anything, we will absolutely go over it just to make sure we completely understand every single thing that's coming in. So I'm going to also copy this function, which is the other delegate function for the Google sign-in delegate. Hit Command B, make sure things are still compiling, post, copy, and paste. And the thing that I'm looking for in here, we also need, this is what we need. We also need this one function, which will allow our app to open up the Google sign-in web view. There are two functions here you'll notice that Google has outlined. If you're targeting iOS 8 and below, which is pretty old, you also need this one. However, we're targeting like the latest, I believe 13 and up. So we're just going to bring in that one. Let's paste that in. Should be correct, possibly, or it could give us an error saying invalid redeclaration. Looks like I already have this function somewhere in here. So let's see, where do we have this function? Do we have this function? This function is UI application open URL. I see, we have an open URL in here. And we want to basically update this. So let's take this and go back to that open URL up here. Looks like this was brought in when we did the Facebook setup. But what we can do is put that return statement down here. And I'm not sure if the Facebook stuff will conflict here. I don't think so because it's not returning anything to the function. So if you hit a Command B, it should still be compiling. But let's make sure we add that return below this guy. Otherwise, this code will never be executed. It'll always use the return here from the Google sign-in objects. And now we can go to our, actually rather, before we go to our controller, let's also implement this function, which is did disconnect with user, which gets called when I believe the user logs out. So we're just going to print in here Google user was disconnected. So now let's go to that login view controller we had, where we're going to place that Google sign-in button. At the very top here, make sure you import Google sign-in. And the way we create a button is we can do it with an outlet or programmatically. So we're going to do it programmatically, similar to the Facebook button here. But before you do that, in your view did load, you do need to specify, I believe, one thing, which is gid sign-in shared instance presenting view controller, and you're going to say self for this. And I think we don't need anything else in here since tapping the button will invoke the actual action. So let's go ahead and create that button. So we're simply going to say private let Google login button is a gid sign-in button. And I don't think it takes parameters, lest I recall. So it does not, it can take a frame, but we're going to do that in the other function where we lay everything out. Come down to the bottom of view did load and make sure you add it as a subview of the scroll view. And finally, in here, we want to lay out that button. So the origin Y for this Facebook button, I don't think we need this anymore. I think we have our Y computed properly here. So go ahead and copy that. Update this to be the Google sign-in button. And we want this to be below the Facebook sign-in button rather than the login button. So put that there. And before we run it, because I'm going to forget to do it, head on over to your profile view controller. And similar to how we log out Facebook here, we are also going to call that logout function on Google. So import Google sign-in. And I think that function is off of the gid sign-in singleton. So gid sign-in, gid, we want this, shared instance, and sign out. What's super annoying is these guys call it login and log out. Google calls it sign in and sign out. I think we called it login and log out. So sometimes I'll try to find sign out off or log out off of this and it doesn't exist and it wastes time. But anyways, it's sign out. So go ahead and hit Command R to build and run. And let's see if we have that button there and if we crash. So looks like we have our button here, but it's a little small in terms of the text and the sizing. Is it the same height? I guess it is, but it's white, so it doesn't pop as much. We can adjust all the styling later, but go ahead and tap this and see if anything happens. We get this prompt to sign in with Google. Hit that, and we'll get this login window here. Now, before we sign in, something we want to keep in mind. Let's change this out of dark mode, go back to Firebase. I've already created an account with my Gmail account here, so I'm going to use, with my email address here rather, from Facebook. So I'm going to make sure to use a different email, even though the provider is Google this time, because we're going to, again, check if that email is used already. So before we continue to actually continue here with Google, let's go back to the let's go back to the app delegate, and we need to bring in that functionality to make sure that the email that the user just signed in with is not in fact the email that exists prior in the account. So what I'm going to do is off of the user object here, if I'm not mistaken, there is a email address. So we're going to say let email equals user, and there's a profile, and there is an email. So we're going to say that is the user's email address, and let's make sure this user isn't optional actually. So user, it's a forced unwrap. Not sure why Google did that. I'm not a fan of forced unwrapping, but anyways, looks like it is not optional. So we'll keep email there. And now in here, what we want to check before we trade it for a Firebase credential is database manager shared. And we want to say email exists or user exists with this email, and completion returns a boolean, so exists in. And if the user doesn't exist, we're going to insert to database. And if the user does exist, we don't want to break out of this because we're not registering. We are continuing with Google. So if the user already exists in the database, just skip this step, but still trade it for a credential. And so in here, we can say database manager shared insert user, and we want to create a chat app user, and this has the first name, last name, and email. So the email is pretty simple, email, and I think that user profile thing above also has a, why is this complaining? Database manager shared use of unresolved. Did I spell this wrong? Email. Oh yeah, I spelled it wrong. Email. Off of this user profile, did I really just spell it wrong again? Value optional string. Okay, it is optional. I lied. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna also unwrap the data up here that we want. So guard let email equals user dot profile dot email, and I also think we have a name on here. So guard let first name is user dot profile dot, is it just name maybe? There we are. So there's, okay, so they call it given name and family name. So your first name is given name, and let last name is user dot profile dot family name, else return. And I'm also gonna put a print here saying did sign in with Google, and we're gonna just put in the user there in that print. And now that we have this data, we can use it to create our chat app user here. So first name is first name, last name is last name. This whole function has no completion handler, so this is good to go. And now that down here we have So basically this is the code that I copy and pasted. So we are grabbing the authentication object off of the user. And if we don't have it, we are gonna return. Pet peeve of mine to put these returns on a new line. And we're also gonna print out missing auth object off of Google user. And after that, we're going to get a credential by calling this Google Auth provider, similar to how we call the Facebook Auth provider. And for the credential function, we pass in a token off of that authentication object. And the first token is an ID token. Second one is an access token. And this is just complaining that it's an unused constant we've got here. Once we have this credential here, we can use Firebase auth to actually sign them in. So Firebase auth, sign in, and we want to say sign in with credential, pass that credential in, and similar to before, there is an auth result and an error in here. So here we're going to say guard auth result doesn't equal nil, error does equal nil, else something went wrong. So we're going to say fail to log in with Google credential and return out of here success, or let's print it out actually. We're going to, at this point, be signed in with the Google credential. Successfully signed in with Google credential. And what's interesting now is actually we are in the, let's see, why is this complaining? We're using the credential now, hit Command B, that warning should go away. Xcode just decides to suck sometimes. But what's interesting now is we're doing all of this login stuff in the app delegate. So why is this complaining now? Because this is also optional. So we're gonna do a nil coalesce and just say no user. Do Command B again, make sure that warning goes away. Great, we can't do that. So let's make our life easy. And let's also unwrap this user up here and say guard let user equals user, else return. And that warning goes away. But anyways, what I was saying is, what's interesting is we're in the app delegate here. And if you recall, whenever we did the Facebook sign-in or the email password sign-in, we were on this login view controller. So we were able to do a dismiss on the navigation controller here, right here. And now the question is, how do we use our app delegate completion there with this sign-in is successful from Google to get rid of this? And the way that we're going to do it is by leveraging a notification. So a notification essentially is a way where the app delegate can fire a notification across the app, and anyone that's listening to it can take action on it. So in the view-to load for this function, what we're going to do is create that type of notification observer. So at the very beginning here, you're going to say notification center .default, and you want to add an observer with a name, and there are two of these here. Well, there's a bunch of these here, but we're going to use this one, and this one actually returns a value that you need to retain. So let me actually do it so you guys can see what I mean. So this needs a name, so just leave that as an empty string for now. We're going to show you, or I'm going to show you how to do it in a nicer way. The object we're going to say is nil. The queue will be the main queue, which is the main thread. And let's see, using will be a callback. And this is going to pass in the notification inside of here. And you're going to quickly see a warning pop up here if you just do a Command B. Maybe not. There should be a warning. Xcode is just being slow. This actually returns a result that we can assign to a discardable result. But instead of doing it this way, what I want you to do is create a private var up here. And we're going to say this is login observer, and it is a NS protocol, NS object protocol. No, we want an NS key value observation, I believe is the type. Let's see. We're going to say login observer equals this. So let's see if it complains about a type mismatch. Yeah, it looks like it does. So let's see, it's saying cannot assign value of type NS object protocol. That's what I was going for. So change this to be NS object protocol, do that command B again, and we are good to go. Now in here, we can actually dismiss this view controller. So again, let's do a weak self because we don't want to cause a retention cycle. And we're going to say guard let strong self equals self, else return. And once this is called, we're just going to say strong self dismiss the navigation controller. I literally copy and pasted this from down below. And let me actually get rid of these line breaks because it's forcing us to indent our block code in a weird way. So let's highlight and Control I and it'll fix it like so. And the reason I wanted you guys to assign this to a property is once this controller deinitializes, aka it dismisses, we want to get rid of this observation if an observation is present, just to save up some memory and clean things up. So under the view did load, go ahead and add one more function, and it's a special one. It's called a deinit, and you can notice it doesn't have the same func signature or override. And in here we're going to say if let observer equals this, we can simply say notification center default, and we want to remove, whoops, let me get rid of my antivirus pop-up here. We're going to say remove observer, and we're going to pass in that observer. Rather, we're going to pass in the unwrapped version of the observer. So go ahead and hit Command B. Things should be building now. So like I mentioned, right now we're just passing in an empty notification name. The reason I wanted you guys to do it this way is because a cleaner way to do this is as follows. Go to that extensions.swift file we created under resources. And because using strings is kind of fragile, what I often like to do and what I recommend you guys do is create an extension off of notification.name and create a static property on here for the notification. So we're going to say static let did login notification, and this is going to equal some notification. So the string gets put in here. And now what we can do is we can go back to that login view controller. And here we can say instead of this, we can simply do did, should be a did login. Let's see, notification dot name and did log in off of this. There we are. Just kidding. Do we have to hit Command B maybe? Sometimes Xcode really decides to make your life difficult. Let me see what I messed up in here. Static let off of notification.name and did log in at notification. So we should be able to use this, and it should be available even though we didn't mark it as public. So we're going to say add observer, and this should be, there we go. Okay, so Xcode was just being a pain. So go ahead and change that to a dot and just paste it on in and hit Command B and it works. And we should actually be able to get rid of this too. There we go. Okay. Yeah, like I said, Xcode just decides to suck a lot. So you can just use the shorthand notation. And the reason this is nice is now, I'm going to copy it. When we go to our app delegates, once the user logs in successfully with Google here, we can just fire this notification and it'll defer the control. Rather, it'll tell the login notification who's observing, hey, I've signed in, go ahead and dismiss. So we're going to say notification center default, and we want to post a notification with a given name. The name again is that did login, object is nil. And I think that's about it. So let's go ahead and hit Command R to build and run and test this out. So I'm also gonna make sure we reload this like so, looking good. We're gonna hit sign in with Google. We're gonna continue, and I'm gonna type in my other email here. like so. And I'm going to pause the video, type my password, and be back in a second. I just signed in here to my Google account, and it did in fact work. So I went ahead and deleted the user here just to reset this all for the Google sign-in. It has since cached my Afraz SAE email, so go ahead and hit that, and you'll see it'll disappear. If it didn't have our password cached, it would ask us for our password again. But what we care about is it successfully signed us in, and if we close the app and reopen, we should remain signed in. And more importantly, over here, let's go ahead and refresh this authentication page. And now we see from our Google provider, we have a new user with the appropriate email. Let's also take a look at our database. So let's go to the real-time database. And we should have another entry in here for my other email address, which we do with the given first name and last name. So again, we're deduping users based on the email address being unique, not the name, so the names can be redundant, but the emails have to be unique. So let's also make sure the sign out functionality works before we wrap this up. So go ahead and hit log out and log out here, and you can see that the sign in with Google is still sign in, no sign out here. Facebook looks good. Let's close the app and reopen, make sure we're still on this login page, which we are. So there you have it. That's how you can add Google sign-in. This is the last sign-in method that we're going to do for this series, and after this, we're going to dig into searching for users to start a new conversation. So before we actually wrap up, let's go ahead and CD into the project and just commit our changes. So we're going to come in here and do a git add. We're going to do a git status. So you'll see that there are a bunch of things in here, namely dependencies from the CocoaPods that we installed. I also might have forgotten to commit this for the last part of the video series that I did. But anyways, go ahead and do a commit. And the message here we're going to do is set up Google sign-in handle sign out. And we're going to hit enter. And we'll commit everything, Command K to clear, and then we're going to do a Git Push. I already set up a remote repository. If you're not familiar how to do that, I would encourage you to just Google it and take a look. I'll probably make a separate video on Git. It's probably a good idea. So this code is now pushed up to GitHub, and as I mentioned in earlier parts, I'll be making it available. So that said, if you haven't smashed that like button already, make sure to do so for the YouTube algorithm. Helps out a lot. Helps me make more videos for all of you. Comment if you have any questions, any errors. I reply to every single comment within a few days. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next part.